Every day when I wake up in the morning, I see the sky and I think about the things that you've made, all the beauty and your glory is showing, yeah. It never bores me to look at the ocean. The waves are crashing, the water spraying up in my face. I look above and all the seagulls are soaring, yeah. We've got to overcome the darkness so we don't get caught in the middle, between the hopeful and the heartless. So, hello, good day, good morning, I just can't stop smiling, because today is a brand new day, and all the darkness and the pain is just fading behind me. Oh Lord, what a beautiful day. All the planets surround me, the way they orbit just boggles my mind, the way the sun keeps on shining, yeah. We got to overcome the darkness so we don't get caught in the middle, between the hopeful and the heartless. So, hello, good day, good morning, I just can't stop smiling, because today is a brand new day, and all the darkness and the pain is just fading behind me. Oh Lord, what a beautiful day. There's nothing to fear, it'll be okay. It's the day that the Lord has made. It's the day that the Lord has made. There's nothing to fear, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. It's the day that the Lord has made. That the Lord has made. It's the day that the Lord has made. That the Lord has made. So, hello, good day, good morning, I just can't stop smiling, because today is a brand new day, and all the darkness and the pain is just fading behind me. Oh Lord, what a beautiful day.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Live with Doug. My name is Doug, and we are live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, thinking through God's Word together. Glad to have you all with us as we continue to look at Daniel's 70 weeks in light of Romans 11 and answering the question, what about Israel? So glad you could join us. Hope you had a great weekend and a great day of fellowship yesterday with the saints of Jesus Christ. So let's dive right in. I know last week provoked some questions, and let's see if we can answer some of those. So if you were with us, even if you weren't, I want to recap and make sure that we catch the context of what we're saying here. We are in Romans. We've been working our way for a few weeks now, Romans 9 through 11. Very important and challenging passage talking about Israel and Paul's addressing the question of whether or not God's word for Israel has failed. That's his burden, chapter 9, verse 6. It's not as though the word of God has failed, and he's responding to the idea that all these promises were made to Israel, and yet so many, in fact, the vast majority of Jews did not receive Christ. They didn't receive the righteousness of Christ, and it seems like God hasn't made good on his promises. So we've been working our way through it, and in chapter 11, verse 25, we read this: I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery, so that you will not be wise in your own estimation, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. So Paul is saying there's a mystery here, and a mystery, remember, in the Bible is not a whodunit. It's not a problem to be solved. It's something that was hidden that has now been revealed. And Paul is saying, I'm going to reveal this to you, this mystery. I'm going to take the cover off so you can see it. And what is that mystery? God has hardened Israel. It's a judicial hardening. It's punishment. He's hardened Israel so that they would not see Jesus as Messiah. And Paul says here it's partial. And when we get done with the rest of this, sometime this week probably, we'll come back and look at that word partial. But it's a partial hardening, and it's happened to Israel until, right? Until, that's a time referent. Until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And that's an important phrase too. What in the world is the fullness of the Gentiles? Or it could be translated the fulfillment of the Gentiles. We will come back and look at that as well. There are a couple of other time reference. Earlier in chapter 11, he talks about the present time, the hardening that's happened at the present time, which is present for Paul. And then later on, he's going to say that the Jews will now receive mercy. And now is in Paul's day. So part of the question that we're answering is, what is going on in Paul's day that might give us any indication of these time reference? The partial hardening, the present time for him and the hardening, and the now when Israel might receive mercy. So with all that as context, Paul quotes then from two passages in Isaiah to talk about the universal salvation of Israel. So they're partially hardened until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And then he says, and so, and remember the so means in this way, all Israel will be saved. In what way? Well, just as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. And Mark, you said you're caught up, so you saw this most recently in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew, in Isaiah. It's the deliverer will come to Zion. But Paul now is reading this as a Christian, saying, no, this is about the deliverer coming from Zion, or the Redeemer coming from Zion. That's Jesus. And he will remove ungodliness from Jacob. This is my covenant with them, pointing to the new covenant. And then you remember, the last part of verse 27 is quoting from Isaiah 27, and that this is not a great translation. When I take away their sins, it's when I atone for their sins. And in Isaiah 27, you recall, the way that God's going to atone for their sins, and this has started heading toward our time reference, what's going on in Paul's day that he might be referring to. In Isaiah 27, here's the prediction. Therefore, through this, Jacob's iniquity will be literally atoned for. And remember, we talked about how forgiven is a little bit of interpretation by the NAS. It's not, forgiven is not the word, it's atoned for. We talked about there are two ways to atone for sin. One is for your sins to be transferred to someone else, and they suffer the consequences, or for you to suffer the consequences. And here, Jacob, God's people, Israel, their sins are going to be atoned for through this. Well, what's this? Banishing them, driving them away, the fierce wind expelling them. And then he goes on, this will be the full price of their pardoning, of their being turned aside, their sin being turned aside, when he, God, makes all the altar stones like pulverized chalk stones. When God destroys the city and destroys the temple, that is when Jacob's sins will be atoned for. So he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Well, we know that Isaiah was written before the fall of Jerusalem in 586, so God did this. He did it just as he said he would. But there's more. This was pointing towards something that would come later. So, I know this is a lot, and if you've been through this, you might be saying, "Get on with this, Doug." Yes, we've been through this, but for anybody who's just catching us today, I want to bring you up to speed, but I'm going a little faster than I have been. So if this is new to you, you need to go back and watch the most recent broadcasts and catch up, because I'm going through this fairly quickly, but we went through it in more detail earlier. So we remember that Jesus and his disciples were outside the temple in Matthew 24. And we read this. Jesus came out from the temple, was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And Jesus said, "Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another which will not be torn down." So after Isaiah's vision, they rebuilt the temple. well, I'm sorry, after Isaiah's vision, the temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC, or in that time frame. And then later they rebuilt the temple. Then we get to Jesus' day, and it's a big, glorious temple, and the disciples are marveling at it, and Jesus says it's all going to be knocked down again. It's all going to be destroyed. There won't be one stone left. This got the disciples' attention, but remember, they respond now with a question like they knew this was coming. This was not a brand new idea to them. See what they said in verse 3? As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen? When is when's the temple going to be destroyed? And what will be the sign of your coming?" And I know I've talked about this multiple times, but it's just so ingrained in our heads that whenever we see the word coming in the New Testament, we think second coming. We think the return of Christ at the end of the age, end of our age. But there's no good reason to think the disciples were looking and thinking about Jesus leaving and coming back again. Remember, they didn't think he was going to leave. They didn't believe him when he said he was going to die. No, they have something else in mind. They're rehearsing now in their minds what they know about the prophecies from the Old Testament. And so they're asking, when? You're going to come and do what? Well, destroy Jerusalem. That's what he just said was going to happen. Knock over the temple. What's going to be the sign that you're coming to do that? And the end of the age. They have some concept here of the destruction of the temple being tied to the end of the age. Well, Jesus goes on to explain, and we'll come back to this later this week, but he goes on in verse 15 and he says something that's going to point us to where we're heading. Thanks for your patience here, but it's important. It's important to put all this together. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation, this is a key word, desolation. Desolate, lonely, destroyed, decimated, all those kind of concepts in this word. When you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place in the temple, let the reader of Daniel understand. I believe these should be in red letters. I believe Jesus is saying this. Let the reader of Daniel understand. Get out of Dodge. Flee Judea. Okay? So all of that is backdrop to get us to Daniel 9, which is where we left off on Friday. And I gave you so much background then, we didn't actually get to the prophecy. So I'm not going to let that happen again. We're going to get to it. But I do need to remind you of at least the context of Daniel 9 here. So Jerusalem fell in 586. Through Jeremiah, God had predicted that after 70 years, he would bring people back to Jerusalem and they would rebuild the temple. Daniel is in exile in Babylon. He's reading Jeremiah's prophecy. He starts doing the math and he realizes they're coming on 70 years. And so he begins to pray and ask the Lord to do what he said he would do, to bring his people back to Jerusalem, let them rebuild the temple. And he's humbly confessing the sin of the nation of Israel to God, saying, we are here in exile, and the holy city lies in ruins, and the temple has been toppled because we are wicked people, because we broke your covenant. And oh God, you said in your covenant, if we break it, if we commit idolatry, you will destroy us. And you have made good on your word, God. But you've also said in 70 years, you'll bring us back. So I'm asking you, bring us back, make good on your word again, and take us back to Jerusalem to rebuild. So he's praying that. And as he's praying that, verse 21 says, while I was still speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision previously, that's an earlier vision, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. He gave me instruction and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you insight with understanding. At the beginning of your supplication of the command was issued, and I've come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. So give heed to the message and gain understanding of the vision. Okay, one more setup here. Daniel is praying for God to answer his prayer and to make good on his promise to rebuild Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Got to have that clear in your mind. That's what Daniel's asking. Lord, do what you said you would do. Bring your people back to the city. Let us build the city again. Let us rebuild the temple. Okay? Gabriel is coming to respond to that prayer. I hope you're tracking. Here's what Gabriel's message to Daniel is. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city. Do you see that? Do you hear that? 70 weeks, or literally in Hebrew, it's the word 77s. Yes, Daniel, the people are going to come back to Jerusalem. Yes, they're going to rebuild the city. Yes, they're going to rebuild the temple. But there's an end date to how long it's going to last. Yes, you'll be restored from exile, but it's not forever. It's not permanent. 77s have been decreed for your people, Daniel, and your holy city. Again, especially as you see what's coming here, there's an ominous tone to this. Because in Daniel's mind, the people are going to go back, rebuild the city, rebuild the temple, and there are other prophecies from Isaiah and from other of the prophets before the destruction of Jerusalem that talk about restoring the people to the land and a golden age of worldwide dominion and great prosperity and fruit bearing and God's abundant blessing. So it would make sense from Daniel's perspective, based on what he knows from God's word, that restoring the city and the temple is going to prepare the way then for great prosperity. And Gabriel the angel shows up and says, 77s are decreed. Now, let's come back. We'll come back and talk about the meaning of that and the timing here in a moment. So here's what he says is going to happen after these 77s. Or here's what the purpose of the 77s is. To finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Do you see that? 70 weeks have been decreed for your people, Daniel, and the holy city. And what's going to happen during that time? The transgression is going to be finished. Sin is going to be ended. Atonement made for iniquity. Bring in everlasting righteousness. What do you think of when you hear all of these things? Somebody tell me, what do you think of what this is? What does this all sound like? This word finish, if you've been with us in other studies, in the Greek translation, it's a form of the word telos. And remember, we've seen a significant connotation of the word telos is the purpose, the completed end, not just bringing it to an end, but fulfilling its intended purpose, getting to the end zone, completing the goal kind of thing. So to complete the goal of transgression, to complete the goal of sin, atonement, and all of that, to bring in everlasting righteousness. What does that sound like to you? Atonement, everlasting righteousness. It sounds like Jesus, does it not? Sounds like the cross. Finishing the transgression, possibly Israel's transgression, getting to the end of that. The ultimate end is when they crucified Christ. Or it could be making an end, could be parallel to making an end to sin, atoning work on the cross. All three of these could be describing what Christ accomplished on the cross, which then brings in everlasting righteousness for those who have faith. Sealing up, the idea of sealing, there's a couple of different meanings, right? One of them is to if you think of a king who rolls up a scroll and puts wax on the scroll and puts his signet ring in the wax, that does two things. It seals it up so that it can't be opened without proper authority, but it also gives the authenticity of the king. If his ring, his signet is stamped on there, it indicates this is real, this is authoritative. It's really from the king. So the vision and prophecy, all that has been pointing toward its fulfillment, is authenticated. again, Jesus, and to anoint the most holy. You see here the word place is in italics, which means it's not in the original. Could be anoint the most holy place, as the NAS takes here. It could be anoint the most holy one, Messiah, the anointed one. Either one works. And both would fit the coming of Christ, because Christ is the anointed one, and he does anoint the most holy place, the glory he came into the temple, right? So we'll come back to some of that maybe. So you are to know, Daniel, you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, so it's going to happen, Daniel, there will be a rebuilding of Jerusalem. From that time, from the time of rebuilding the temple until Messiah the Prince. So Daniel doesn't know anything about the Messiah. At least he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know when, right? Gabriel is telling him from the decree of issuing the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again. Jerusalem will be built with plaza and moat, and even in times of distress. There's going to be hardship in building it. And if you have read Nehemiah and Ezra recently, as they were part of rebuilding the city, temple and all that, you know there was opposition all the way along. So we know how this is all fulfilled here. Then after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. Okay, so it's tricky here. Stay with me. I teach this regularly, and it's amazing how many people get tripped up on this. So between the command to rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. What is 7 plus 62? 69, right? So there'll be 7 weeks and then 62 more. 7 plus 62 is 69. Then after the 62 weeks, which is after the 69th week, do you see that? There will be, so the command is given, restore, rebuild Jerusalem. That word is issued, restore, rebuild Jerusalem. There will be 7 and 62 weeks, which is 69 weeks. After the 62 weeks, which is really the 69th week, because you've already had the first 7, and then the next 62, which is 69. So this is whatever is happening here is after the 69th week. Even though it says after the 62, it's 62 plus 7, which is 69. And I stress this because I can't tell you how many times I've asked people, how many weeks is the 62? Or what comes after the 62nd week? And they say the 63rd week. Like, no, you got to add the first 7. That's what he just said. Had one lady in a class years and years ago just fight me tooth and nail on this because, not because she couldn't do math, but because some of us have been taught that after the 69th week, there's a gap of 2,000 years. And she could see where this was heading, and she didn't like it. And so she couldn't actually follow what the text was saying because her presuppositions coming to the text required there to be this gap. And so she was not paying attention. Hopefully, you're all seeing here that after the 62 weeks means after the 69th week because you've got to add the first 7. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you are all tracking with me here. So after the 62 weeks, which is the 69th week, so would be during the 70th week, right? During the 70th week, Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. Again, what does that sound like? He's rejected. He's on the cross. All of this is pointing to Jesus. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city. Now, I know your first question is, who are the people of the prince? Who's the prince? Let's come back to that, but let's look and see what he's going to do. He's going to destroy the city and the sanctuary. Daniel, the city will be rebuilt. The sanctuary will be rebuilt. There will be a temple again. But after the 69th week, these people are going to come and they are going to destroy the city and the sanctuary. It is not permanent. It is not eternal. It is not going to last forever. There is an end marked out. Remember back here at the beginning? There is an end marked out for your people and your holy city. To do all of this, finish the transgression, atonement, bring in everlasting righteousness and all that. After the 69th week, Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and these people will come and destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. Desolations. It has been determined the city, the temple, it's going to be wiped out again. Desolations. Remember Jesus' words? When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel. This is what he's talking about. When you, and Jesus is talking to his disciples. We'll come back and look at this more carefully tomorrow. When you disciples see the abomination of desolation in the temple or at the temple, knocking on the door, when you see this about to take place, when you see the temple about to be made desolate, run for the hills, flee Judea. That's what Jesus is talking about. He came out from the temple. The disciples draw attention to the temple. He says, do you not see all these things? One stone will not be upon another. It's going to be destroyed, just like Daniel said. When, Lord? When will this happen? What will be the sign of your coming? What are the disciples referring to? The sign of your coming. You're coming to destroy the temple. Why do they think Jesus is going to do it? And the end of what age? Well, the Messiah is Messiah the Prince, right? The Messiah is going to be cut off, which we now can see how that would be the cross. Cut off. The people rejected him. Crucify him, crucify him. They put him on the cross. He had nothing. He lost it all. If this prince here in verse 26 is the same as Messiah the Prince, then Daniel could be predicting that the people of the prince are those the prince sends to destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the disciples may be saying, what will be the sign of your coming? We are now beginning to see, Jesus, that you are the one who Daniel prophesied about, and you are the one who's going to come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. And what will be the sign of that? And the end of the age, the end of this time of the Jews, of the sanctuary, of the city. All right. So then here's the big controversial passage. It says here in verse 27 that he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate. See that word again? Even until a complete destruction. One that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So some of you have been taught that the 69th week was to lead to the coming of Christ, and the Jews rejected Jesus as Messiah, so God put on hold this plan for the Jews and introduced this parenthesis, this parenthetical time period. They call it a gap, and the 70th week of Daniel is still yet to come. So God did not finish his plan with Israel, because the Jews, when Jesus showed up as the Messiah, the Jews rejected him. And so God says, okay, I'm going to turn my attention for a while to the Gentiles. So there was the period of the Jews, the period of the law, whatever, different dispensations. This is dispensationalism, different dispensations. And since the Jews rejected Jesus, he turns his attention to the Gentiles. And there's this unanticipated age of grace, or age of the Gentiles, the church age, whatever. It's a parenthesis. And at some point, God is done with this age of the Gentiles and closes the other side of the parenthesis and raptures the church out. And then God finishes his plan with Israel. And the 70th week, we're still waiting for it. And it's called a 7-year tribulation because of this. So the 77s of Daniel 9 are 77-year periods, which I believe is true. And so you've got 69 7-year periods up to the point in the coming of Jesus. But since the Jews rejected him, the 70th 7-year period is put on hold until the rapture happens. And then there will be a 7-year period, the 70th week, that is for Israel. So the church is gone. It's for Israel. And this prince who is to come is the Antichrist. And he is going to make a firm covenant with the Jews. They're going to be sucked into his seductions. And he's going to make a covenant with them for 7 years. And it's going to be ugly. It's going to be awful for them. 7-year tribulation. And this is where you get your pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib ideas. And there are different views as to when the rapture happens. Is it before the tribulation starts? So the next thing we're waiting for here in history is the rapture. And then the tribulation comes. Some would say, no, the church is going to go through half of it because they grab some other 3.5 year statements from Daniel and Revelation. And others say, no, the church is going to go through it and be raptured at the end of the tribulation before the millennium, which is for Israel primarily. And it's all, that 7-year period of tribulation is all from this passage. The 70th week of Daniel is a 7-year period yet to come for Israel. I don't think any of that's true. I don't think anything in the scripture gives us any hint of that, actually. I believe the 70th week, the 70th 7-year period, followed, it's past tense for us, followed the 69th year period, just as Daniel predicted. A word about the 77s. I think Paul mentioned this in one of his comments over the weekend. Remember, this is prophecy, right? And prophecies are often the numbers are symmetrical and they have meaning, and they're not intended to be a literal or extremely precise timeline. So I think the 77s is I don't think we're supposed to count exactly 490 years. And there's even the fulfillment of all of this, the decree. When exactly was that decree? The temple was destroyed in 586. You think 70 years is 516, right? And so the decree, and there is a decree, it's around that time, but then there's delays and all this. I don't think the intent is to actually trace to the exact year, because there are even different questions of how we go about counting. How, is it a Jewish year? Is it a Babylonian year or a Persian year or a Greek year? Because you've got different empires in there and all that. No, just think about it in round terms here. If this is somewhere around 500, 516 BC that the decree is given, 490 years is pretty close. I mean, from people who are 5 centuries prior to be told that this is all going to occur within about 5 centuries, they're going to be dead and gone anyway. I mean, it fits. It gets us in the time frame, and again, that's how prophetic words are used. Times, years, the numbers are symbolic. It's kind of like the millennium. Most people, regardless of their views of the millennium, don't actually think it's going to be a literal 1,000-year period. There are some, but the book of Revelation is just chocked full of symbols. I mean, in that same passage, Satan is a dragon. Well, he's not really a dragon, right? He's a spirit. So in this symbol-laden book, it's hard to, why would you suddenly conclude that 1,000 years must be literal when Satan is described as a dragon symbolically, and so on. So think about this. Jesus used the same time frame, right? 77s, or the same numbers, 77s. When Peter asked him, how many times should I forgive? And what does Jesus say? Not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Does he mean to Peter, all right, Peter, start tracking, and you forgive 490 times? That's what I'm telling you. Forgive 490. But on the 491st time, you don't have to forgive. No, that's not what he's saying. He's using an expression of numbers, of symbolic numbers that have meaning. 70 times 7. That's a lot. That's a huge number of times to forgive. 77s. This is 77-year periods of Sabbath for the land. If you go back to Leviticus and you read in Leviticus 25, God says, I want you not only to have your 7-day Sabbath every week, but I want you to give the land a 1-year Sabbath every 7 years. So you have 6 years of working the land and then give the land a 7th year Sabbath. That's a 7-year period, right? And then 7 of those 7-year periods, there's the year of Jubilee, in which you free all the slaves and people are released of their debts and all of that. What Daniel's seeing here is this 70 of those, or 7 of those 7-year Jubilee periods, 77s. So it's not to be taken, I don't think, strictly literally, but if you're alive 490 years after this, you start paying attention to what's happening. And again, the timing is pretty close. So what I think is going on here is I think Daniel is seeing or hearing, receiving from Gabriel, the prophecy of the coming of the Messiah, who we now know as Jesus. And he fulfilled all of these things. He finished the transgression, made an end of sin, made atonement for iniquity. He brought in everlasting righteousness. He authenticated, sealed up the vision and prophecy. He anointed the most holy place. It could be, again, him, the anointed one, or he anointed the holy place, the temple, by being in the temple himself. There was the prophecy, the fulfillment of rebuilding Jerusalem. In the right time frame, at the end of that 69 weeks, almost 490 years later, Messiah the Prince showed up, and he was cut off from the people. The people rejected him. I believe he's the prince here who sent his people, the Romans, to destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now, it could be that this prince is actually Titus, the Roman general, and the people of the prince here would be the Roman soldiers under the prince, under his direction to destroy the city. It also could be that the prince here refers back to the same thing the prince refers to in verse 25, which is Messiah, and his people, meaning the Romans, were sent to destroy the city and the sanctuary. This happened in AD 70. If you're not familiar with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, you need to be familiar. It was devastating. Josephus is a Jewish historian. He's not a Christian. He's a Jewish historian who documented what happened in the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD when Titus, the Roman governor, came and led the armies, and they laid siege to the city and eventually burned the temple to the ground, destroyed everything. It was so awful for the Jews. The siege and the chaos and all the infighting that happened in the city, that just as Deuteronomy 28 predicted, Josephus records women eating their children. Cannibalism, because they were starving to death. That took place in the destruction in 70 AD. That's what this is about. That's what Daniel is talking about. And here in 27, here's again where our English doesn't help us. It says, he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. This word for is not in the Hebrew or the Greek. It's not in any translation of this. And I stress that because it sounds like, in English here, it sounds like he, whoever this he is making a covenant with the Jews for 1 week. And this is where the dispensationalists get their 7-year tribulation. The word for is not here. I think he's still talking about the new covenant. I think it's what's happening in this week, this 70th week. That's when this Messiah will make the covenant, the new covenant with the many, the remnant who are faithful. So if I'm going to put a preposition here, because in the Hebrew and the Greek, there is no preposition. If I'm going to put a preposition here, it's going to be during or in the week. He, the Messiah, will make a firm covenant with many during the 1 week, which is the 70th week. And he will put a stop to the sacrifice and the grain offering. Not that the Jews didn't actually continue to do it, but it didn't matter anymore. It's like the writer of Hebrews says, those offerings are worthless now because they've all been fulfilled. He has sealed up the vision, the prophecy, and all the things that the old covenant rituals were for. So I believe this is the new covenant that Messiah makes with the people of God. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, and the complete destruction is decreed, and that's exactly what happens. Titus comes and wipes out the city, just as Jesus predicted, as he says to his disciples in Matthew 24, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel, standing in the holy place, those who are in the Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever's on the housetop must not get out, get the things out of the house. Run, because the city is about to be destroyed. And remember, we looked at this on Friday. He ends this section, or at least he says in the middle of this section, this generation, the generation that Jesus is talking to, will not pass away until all these things take place. Tomorrow we'll come back and we will look at Luke's version of this, because it's a little more, it's a little easier to follow, put it that way, to see what Jesus is getting at. All right, I see a couple of comments here. Let me check in on those, and then we will call it a day, because our time has gotten away. The prince Daniel speaks of is not Messiah. It's the prince that destroyed the temple. What implications are there? Well, how do you know that? How do you know that? You're saying that so confidently. How do you know? Right? As I said, it could be the prince, the ruler, Titus, Vespasian, who destroyed the temple. But you say it is not. It's not the Messiah. How do you know? Prove it. Show me. Paul says, perhaps that is why Jesus tells the disciples to look for the signs of the upcoming destruction. It does not talk about a date, so they must have understood the 49 years symbolic. Yeah, exactly. Jesus vindicated himself, right? He by raising the dead and doing all the miracles, he proved, look, you need to listen to me. I am doing things that are unexplainable apart from the power of God, and so now I'm telling you this is what Daniel meant. So his interpretation of things is what we want to follow, because he's the Messiah. He's the one who authenticated his own work by doing this. So that's how I see it. Again, a lot of people disagree, and that's fine. You can disagree. Jose can disagree with me. That's fine, but you can't just throw out statements like that. Prove it. I walked you through my explanation. You said it's not the Messiah. Prove it. Would be my challenge to you. And I don't mean that means in a mean spirit. I'm just saying, if you're going to make a bold declaration, then let's see your rationale. This is making sense to me. Hopefully it's making sense to you. Tomorrow we'll come back and look at the Olivet Discourse, Luke 21, and see what else Jesus has to say about this. Well, our time is up, so I'm going to move on. Have a great day. Wrestle with this. Think about it. And we will come back and look at some more tomorrow. God bless.